Yo, this is Osiris. You found the channel Middle Maga, and we've got great friend of the show on a hot topic, of course, right now, and looking forward to the discussion. Carlos from Patriots of the American Republic. What's good, sir?
What's going on, Osiris? How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. It's I wish I had you on. We could talk about we can, but there's no excuse. But this is a hot topic I want to talk about, and it saddens me to talk about it because it's so complicated. It goes back so far, and there's no easy answers. Describing the problem isn't even easy. So I wish it was under better circumstances, but we are talking about the Israeli. I don't even know how to describe it. Let's start there, Carlos. What's going on with Israel? Is it accurately described as an Israeli versus Hamas war, or is it via Iran via proxy, or Palestinians? What's the right way to phrase this?
Gosh, any one of those is pretty much accurate, right? The point here is, and there's so much information coming in, right? Everybody's got their different views. We know, you and I both know since we're in this game, that there's always going to be a left-leaning view and a right-leaning view, and then there's people in between. And the tricky part is, based on how the left is, even if you're in the middle and you don't agree with them, well, you're automatically on the right. You know what I'm saying? So anybody who's looking at any type of video or any type of information that wants to try and explain this, if they're going to start in the 20th century, you can bet your bottom dollar they're more than likely coming from a leftist view, because that's their starting point. It's very similar to how Black Lives Matter. They want to start with slavery in the Americas, denying and ignoring the fact that slavery was a worldwide regular event, a norm, if you will. It didn't start out by skin color. It started out by region and class, right? And it was on every continent, including the African continent. But they don't want to acknowledge that or look at that. They want to start from America and go forward. It's the same thing. The people who want to promote the Palestinian point of view, they're going to start from World War I, World War II forward, right? And this conflict stems even before that time frame. So to your point, it is complex.
Wow, that's a great way to put it, because I'm so enthralled in that 1619 project type discussion where they want to start the history of the country at a certain place because it fits the way that they want to frame things. I never put that same thought into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So you said they like to start at World War I?
Between World War I and World War II.
Yep. Because I'm familiar with the World War II going on. Basically, I'm not an expert here. They've fought in World War II, were promised the land. Is that accurate? If you let me break this for you and let me know based on what you know. Is it accurate that in World War II they fought and they were promised to have some of the land, or that's now Israel, but then after the war they got kicked out?
Yeah, so they've been kicked out so many times. Remember, in World War II, you've got the Holocaust, right? 6 million Jews died, right? And so what happens is that once the defeat took place, right? They were essentially they were owned at that time by the Brits, if I'm not mistaken, and the Brits pulled out, and they basically left the Jews and the Arabs there by themselves, and they had to essentially defend for themselves. So basically you had all the neighboring Arab countries not really in line with that. They didn't want to give the Jews any land whatsoever. So the conflict was almost immediate after World War II.
And that brings us to this. But then you said, so right now we're just breaking down. We'll get into some clips and stuff like that. But this is a great place to start, just talking about that region out there. And I kind of feel like I want to say I don't care about that. Maybe we'll get to that later. But it's hard not to, because they're trying to drag the U.S. into it. They want to drag you into it. So I want to know, when am I getting dragged into? Let's go to, you said before that things were different. Where would you go? How far back would you go? Are you talking about 2,000 years ago? What are we talking about?
Yeah, pretty much. So remember, this is, whatever somebody tells you, bottom line, this is a territorial dispute. right? They want land that they believe belongs to them, and Israel wants to hold on to the land that they believe belongs to them. Who owns it, right? And that's where you're going to get which view you're talking about, because if you're on the left side, you're going to start again from like pretty much World War I, World War II, somewhere around there, so that it fits your time frame, right? But if we go further back in time, right? If we go back to biblical times, then the land begins or belongs to the Jews. Now, there's one thing that I really want to mention here, because we need to separate two aspects of this conflict. One is religious and the other one is nationality. Why is that different? Because nationality depicts where you're born. Religion means what you're following, what you're choosing to follow. And yes, that could be based on your environment. But most of the Palestinians are more than likely Muslims, right? And the Muslim lineage, according to the Quran, comes from, just like it does for Christianity and Judaism, Father Abraham, right? So we have to go all the way back to the book of Genesis to find out the origins of this religious conflict. Abraham gives birth to Ishmael, spurring, again, according to the Quran, there's no validation, it's just based on what the Quran says, that Ishmael gives way to the Muslim lineage, if you will. And then Isaac, the other son, the one that was prophesied by God, is the one that gives lineage to the Jewish faith. So that's how far back we got to go to really get to the bottom of this.
Okay, and so some people were bringing that up to me, and let me change it to this. As far as that land being very holy and, just sacred to a lot of people, to me, to even the kind of, you could say, the founding of our country in a way. But when I look at it, I'm like, that's like biblical. That's historical. Right now, the prime minister is Benjamin Netanyahu, and I don't have any ties to that, bro. So am I wrong there? Like, how do we look at it from the standpoint of, should the U.S. care about it because it is holy land? Christians should...
It depends on your view. If you are a person of faith, you should very care for it, because, right, that is, number one, where our God is from, right, Jesus Christ, right? That is the Holy Land by God himself, Yahweh. Right? He chose that land. He chose the Jewish people to be their people. And not only that, but he is going to return to that land and establish a new Jerusalem, as it is said in the book of Revelation. So from a biblical, religious, faith-filled perspective, yes, we should care, because the other side wants to destroy that. If they destroy that land, thus they can prove that there is no Jewish God, there is no Christian God.
So, so that's where I'm lost there. So you're saying potentially that some of the Muslims there, is that all of them? Because I know there's different types, like the Sunni or whatever. Are you saying that they would destroy the land?
They're all Muslims, whether it's Sunni or Shiite, right? They're just different tribes of the same, right, religious factor. There's differences between the two, but it's almost like a different denomination between like Baptist and Methodist, right? But nonetheless, it's still Islam. Yes, for the most part, I mean, I don't know, what other religious group would be on the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. They're all Muslims, right? And so what they want, when you look at the Muslims across the region, right, into other countries, whether it's Jordan, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Iran, whether it's pretty much, yeah, they don't want how do I put this? I don't want to be politically correct. And I also don't want to paint everybody in one box, but the reality is the people in charge, I think that's a way to define it. The people in charge who have power, they hate Jews. They want the Jews out of there. They want that land because they believe they are the first descendants of Abraham and it belongs to them.
But does that mean they would destroy it, though?
Well, the president of Iran, absolutely, he said it publicly back in like 2011, 2012. He wants Israel completely and utterly destroyed. And he also chants the death of America as well, because he sees the partnership and we're the great devil. They're the great devil and we're the little devil.
Wow, man, this is deep. And this is the underpinning. We're kind of like getting beneath the surface now, like the underpinning of the tension going back years. And now we're looking at there's other beef here now that's current times, but do you think that fundamentally that this is a war still over that because it's Holy Land?
Yes, yes. Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is the holy city, right? It belongs to the three major religions, right? It belongs to Judaism, right? Obviously, because King David establishes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. You've got Christianity, right? After the Old Testament comes the New Testament, all the things that happened within Jerusalem, right? And then 500 years after Christianity is established, then you've got Islam, which also wants to include itself in that ownership of Jerusalem. And they've actually conquered it, which is what kicked off, or what the Crusades were all about, was taking back the Holy Land from the Muslims that had invaded and conquered it. So that land is there's a lot of turmoil in it because each one wants a piece of it. Now, what you have to think about is which one is promoting violence and which one isn't. Christians sure aren't. Jews sure aren't. So it's this other side that is. It's the Muslim side. You want to call it radical, you want to call it extremist, I don't really care. But if there's a group of people, like right now, okay, let's put it this way, the KKK. They actually use the Bible to promote their racism and white supremacy, which I don't understand because the book of Ephesians, it really clearly says that there's no distinction between Jews and Greeks, there's no distinction between man and woman, and there's no distinction between free or slave. All are the same under Christ. We've got nationality, we've got gender, and we've got financial status. That tells me that we're all the same under Christ, right? So I don't understand that. However, the majority of the Christian nation will denounce that and say that's not what we believe in and that group doesn't pertain to us. I don't hear that from the other side of the spectrum. The normal Muslims, I don't hear them condemning these fanatics, these extremists, these terrorists at all. I have never, in the 10 years that I've been following, 10 plus years that I've been following this, I have not heard the same outcry against these acts. I don't hear it.
Well, yep, it's a lot for me to think about and sink in. And I'll be honest, I haven't heard, I'm probably just listening to the wrong people. I think I've listened to some good people on this topic, but they haven't touched on it from a biblical standpoint. Let's read Jeff O'Donnell, friend of show. I think Jeff is coming from a different standpoint. Let's see what we get here. Abraham married his and then pimped out wife twice, once to a Pharaoh and once to a Philistine king by the God told him to kill his son, my man. The Bible angle is pure BS. So my interpretation of that is Jeff does not agree with the biblical interpretation. He thinks that's different than history.
Yeah, and Jeff is going to have to really do more to disprove the Bible itself, because you're talking about a 4,000 plus year old piece of scripture, right, that was found that all three religions, right, cling on to, because the Quran does borrow things from the Old Testament, right? Now, here's the thing. His interpretation is completely wrong. He calls it pimped out. What it was when Abraham and his wife Sarah were traveling through Egypt. Sarah was very beautiful, according to what the scripture says, and they came across the Pharaoh, who would have more than likely taken her, kidnapped her, and for his wife. He would have added her to his collection of wives due to her beauty. And they would have killed him, being that he was the husband. So he says, listen, let's do this. Tell them that you're my brother. That way they won't kill me. Right? And so what happens is God actually intervenes in that and brings a message to the Pharaoh. And it's like, hey, don't touch that lady because these are my chosen people. And I'm paraphrasing, right? Now, as far as the sacrifice to Isaac, that's what he's talking about, sacrificing his son. Yes, it is a story, and it's a very interesting one. Anybody who reads the Bible, there's three layers. There's a story up top, which anybody who's literate can read. There's the meaning of it. What am I reading? How does that apply to me? What am I trying to understand? And then there's a prophetic message. That's the third layer. How does this point to Christ as a Christian? Again, right? I'm telling you from a Christian perspective. This is the only place where we see God asking for any type of a human sacrifice, right? And as Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, God stops him. He intervenes and he says, don't, right? Don't touch any hair on his head. So he stops, right? And so this is an illustration of what God is going to do the day of tomorrow with Jesus, because on that mountain region where Isaac was about to be sacrificed is the same location where Jesus was actually crucified. So it's a metaphoric illustration, a prophetic illustration of what was going to happen. Abraham sacrificing his first son, his promised son, and then God sacrificing Jesus, his son.
Wow, thanks. So curious to see what Jeff has to say about that. When we take it to the modern times, looking at it, it looks like a tit for tat to me. And all kinds of complications with this. Like with Hamas, which to me comes across as, is my analogy off, where I say, so we're kind of going away from the Bible now, we're going to these, I think they're just like a gang. Like you go to inner city, you've got this gang, they're selling product, and this product they're selling maybe a holy war or whatever, but they're this gang, they recruit poor, uneducated young men who are smart enough to be in their gang, but the ones who are really smart, they kind of get out of there or they don't fall into it. And they become the soldiers in this movement, and they're being manipulated by these Hamas leaders who are in a palace somewhere in Qatar or Iran, and they're just laughing, drinking wine, and got the women and the money, and they're being fed grapes. And the young men who are being exposed, they're the ones paratrooping in to Israel. What do you know about the Hamas side of it? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so Hamas is a terrorist group pretending or portraying to be a government. So they were elected back in 2006 by the Palestinian people. There was a political challenge between Hamas and this other political group, and Hamas won. So since Hamas won in 2006, they've been the governing body of the Palestinians there. Now, here's what, again, and this is why I'm saying that they're pretending to be a government. They're really a terrorist group. Look at the actions that they just did. They kidnapped a bunch of civilians, killed some of them. I'm sure they've raped some of the women. And there's reports where, they've unfortunately, and it pains me to say this, but they've killed babies. They've beheaded babies. 40 from what I saw yesterday. I haven't really been on today to see if there's been an update, but that's not war. Come on. I mean, where do we see stuff like that happening, right? And so to me, they are a terrorist group pretending to be a government. Now, if they really were a government, they would be about their own people. How many rockets did they launch? I think it was like over 5,000. How much did those rockets cost? You're going to tell me they couldn't take that money and put it on infrastructure for their people, food, housing, transportation? No, let's go ahead and spend it on terroristic acts. Let's go ahead and dig tunnels that lead into Israel so we can attack them by surprise. Come on. I mean, where does logic come in and saying this is not what a government does? So they're not a government.
Yeah, sometimes I forget because I don't even look at them like that. And when you start into the military as far as that, and you're doing these kind of terrorist type tactics, I don't look at them as a government. And they haven't had an election since 2006, so that's why they're still in power. Because I think if they could have won elections, they would have had them, and that's just blatant corruption. I guess you could argue it's not much different than the American government. We're just bigger. The American government went out, and after 9/11, reports killed civilians, at least 400,000 civilians. Iraq and Afghanistan is much different. I don't know. But so we had the attack from Hamas. Let's talk about the retaliation, which is, I don't know if Israel was lining up to get on the ground in Gaza, which is a big step up. You can drop bombs or however from the sky, but once you start getting into that urban warfare, that's just some madness. There's mines out there, snipers, and it's just like, I hate to say it, it's kind of like Call of Duty. There's so many hiding spaces and tunnels underground. Man, there's a lot of Israelis who are going to die trying to go in there. What do you think about the retaliation? And I have a huge concern, though, from the Israeli retaliation. I understand they came in, horror, just horror, unspeakable horror, enacted on those people. But you're going to go and just randomly bomb buildings? I mean, maybe they're saying they're targeting them, but you're just bombing from above, and we know civilians are dying. What do you think about the response, and is that justified? Well, I don't want to say that. What do you think about the response?
So it's a tough spot whenever you have to make this decision as a leader, as a president. It's always tough. And even though you want to minimize, civilian casualties, the reality is war is war, and it's sad. But a lot of people, like they did back in 2011, they're going to look at Israel and hold Israel accountable. But nobody seems to hold Hamas accountable, especially not the United Nations, which the United Nations is, supposedly the high and mighty United Nations is supposed to be set in place to deal with stuff like this. But I remember back in 2000, I think if it was 2011, 2012, it was the exact same scenario under the Obama administration. Hamas attacks, Israel fights back, the propaganda campaign starts from Hamas and the other, groups. And so what happens is then they pressure Israel to back down and pressure Israel to step back. And here we are again. And there's been many attacks in between from 2011 to now. It's not just 2011 and now here we are. There's been attacks that have happened in between. So my question then would be, if his response isn't appropriate or adequate, then what is? Because this has been perpetrating now for a decade, at the very least, a decade. And we can almost actually since Hamas came into power in 2006, they attacked immediately, if I'm not mistaken, in 2007 or 2008, they launched their very first attack. So how do you negotiate with terrorists? This isn't government to government. This is a terrorist group. How do you negotiate with terrorists that have no scruples? They don't have any limits. Look at what they did with babies and children and stuff like that. They have none. Right? They're cowards, because if they would have attacked the military outpost, well, then it's war. But they didn't. They went after civilians, people who aren't armed, people who can't fight back, people who can't defend themselves. So I can't say, because I'm not a leader, but you know what? If the enemy is going to survive and attack again the day of tomorrow, then you got to do whatever you got to do to get them out. As carefully as possible.
Yeah, I have the concern about the approach and the this is away from the biblical stuff, the lack of awareness that this happened. We heard, I believe, an American representative, I forget his name, saying that in his mind, Egypt warned Benjamin Netanyahu days before it happened. So my thought is, before you do any type of retaliation, I want to hear, you owe me something. You owe Israel. Let's just take it from Israel. It happens in America, something like that. You owe Americans an explanation. And I need to know, what I really need that explanation to be is to be good enough for me to say you should be in charge of the retaliation. I haven't heard that. This is going off a little bit from the biblical stuff, but what do you think about that part of it?
I did see that. I think it was somebody reported it. So I did see the initial report. I think obviously there was a collapse of intelligence all around, both from Israel, from us, from Israel's allies, right? Nobody knew of it, right? And it's not just on Israel alone, because we're partners with them. We have eyes over the region, and so do other countries, and so on and so forth. So the responsibility, if we're going to blame Israel for the lack of intelligence, then we really should blame all of us, right, including the United States, for that as well. Now, these guys are obviously well funded from places like Iraq, and so it gets very, very tricky. But I'm sure there's going to be an investigation. Can we utterly trust the investigation? Like, it's the people who messed up are going to investigate to see how it messed up, and I'm sure there's going to be finger pointing and the blame game that goes on, because that happens in politics, that happens in corporate America, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if we'll ever really know the truth. Do we ever really know the truth in our own country from our own government? No.
No, I agree. I still, you're going to have to tell me something. I think that's the thing I learned from 9/11 is 9/11, we felt like we all came together, but then now looking back at it, it felt good. But now looking back at it, it was ignorant. we shouldn't really necessarily have come together. Because what did we get out of it? We killed a bunch of innocent citizens. We lost 3,000 of our citizens. And then we got the Patriot Act that's being used right now, used partly against Donald Trump, against dissidents, right now against your own citizens. And it turned out to be, we lost 3,000 lives, and every single thing after that turned out to be a disaster. But we were together and didn't think about it. The first step, you got to tell me, I don't care if you lie to me or what, we'll see if I believe it or not. And then we go on from retaliation. They're quick to, let me drop bombs. But we haven't hashed out what happened. Like, I don't care how long that takes. You can't be dropping bombs to me on another country when I don't know how you let people paratroop in or however they got in.
Yeah, I saw videos of them paratrooping in at the border, and I was close. I think I was on the West Bank, if I'm not mistaken, because we did get to military checkpoints when I was there. I was there in between May and June, and there was fences and barbed wire and stuff like that, and you had like checkpoints where your car had to stop and get checked and so on and so forth. So there is security there. Maybe because due to the holiday, there was a decrease of security members, of IDF soldiers. I really don't know. But here's what I'll say about timing. Timing is unfortunately very crucial. If you take long to take action, then public support wanes. Nobody wants to get into a war, especially a month or a year, 5 years down the road. It's like, what are we fighting for at this point then? You know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, in order for you to strike back, it has to be like almost immediate. And you're right. When it came to 9/11, 9/11 should have been responded the way that it did if it stayed on track to its initial goal, which was to go get bin Laden in Afghanistan. However, somehow Iraq got included in there, and that's where it became political. Bush Jr. was cleaning up Bush Sr.'s dirty work over there. That part I did not support. I never did. I never understood it. And here we are, how many decades later, and we still don't have answers to what happened there, why we went in there. Weapons of mass destruction. What other countries have weapons of mass destruction? Are we going to go into all those countries as well? That was foolish on its face.
Yeah. I put a map of Israel up here, and the first thing that I think of is they are in a tough position. My goodness. You got Lebanon on the north. You've got Syria up, and I believe they struck at some airports over there recently. You've got Syria up here on the north. You've got Jordan over here, and then you've got Egypt, and then you've got the Gaza Strip over here.
And then the West Bank. And the West Bank.
And then the West Bank. Yes. So you're surrounded.
You're surrounded by people who hate you and want to destroy you. Literally. Imagine you living in a house, and I explained this to my wife and my mother-in-law the other day. Imagine you living in your house. Your neighbor wants to kill you, that lives literally next to you. Your neighbor on the other side wants to kill you, lives next to you as well. Your neighbor across the street wants to kill you. And then you've got a tenant that lives in your house that also wants to kill you.
Yeah, that's why they require a lot of assistance. They have a very powerful military, but it looks like to me there is no magic answer.
No.
You've got too many people around you. There's no magic answer of, even people who talk about a two-state solution. What's the guarantee that there would be no more violence? And you still are surrounded by the same people who are still not going to like you. I don't understand what the solution could possibly be. But then does that go towards maybe saying, hey, there's got to be some type of give and take from Israel more than what they're doing now? I don't know.
Well, how do you do that? I mean, think about it. You've got over 50 different Muslim countries. There's only one Israeli country, and they're like, the size of their country is like the size of like New Jersey or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how much more are they supposed to give? And let's be real. If you hear the chants that are going on right now in New York City, here in our own state, for Palestinian support, they're talking about reclaiming their country from the sea to the other side. So it's like they want the entire area for themselves. A two-state solution is not good enough for these folks. And then with that, who gets Jerusalem? How does Jerusalem? Because that's where the real main focus is. Who gets Jerusalem? Is it the Jews or is it the Muslims that get Jerusalem? That's not either which way. Any way you decide, it's not going to please somebody.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's a way to negotiate that at all. So I don't see a path through, unfortunately.
Nope.
But we'll keep talking about it. I just want to share this from the news I saw today. And this goes towards this day of jihad. And I'm going to ask you about that after I play this video. That the NYPD released the following message. All uniformed members of the service are about to perform duty in the uniform of the day. Effective immediately until further notice, all uniformed members of the service in every rank will perform duty in the uniform of the day and be prepared for deployment. This is now America. So you can see why I'm a little bit concerned about what's happening over there. I mean, there's a lot of things I'm passionate about here that I wish that we had this type of passion for, but take a look.
When the Palestinians broke through the fence, they put the F-35s on and as you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters. But I'm sure they're doing very fine despite what the New York Post...
This is very, it might be hard. I don't know, were you able to hear what he just said there?
Yep, I was.
It's pretty, see, this is, if you are on the, and I'm going to stop that video there. It's, if you're on the side of Palestinians, I'm not against you. But it is difficult when you hear stuff like that. I mean, he's basically making fun of what we saw on video. Well, not everything, but we saw kind of, I think Saturdays when it kind of popped off. Paratroopers coming in and firing on unarmed citizens at some type of hippie rave event and making light of it. What's your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, he is making light of it, and he's diminishing the lives of these hippies, right? Like, if their lives don't matter. These are civilians. These were people, it was supposed to be a concert for peace. Think about it. They went for peace, and they get hit with this terroristic attack. I mean, the fact that these people are supporting this is utterly wrong. I think that you can separate supporting maybe the normal people of Palestine, but you can't support Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist group. Again, it's always like a clown world in the times that we live in. It's just not good versus evil anymore. We have to justify evil, and we have to create a smokescreen for evil to continue, because those acts, you cannot classify those acts as anything other than evil. You can't.
Yeah, you really hurt your cause when you talk like that. And you might have a path towards reaching people and you turn them off. Take a look at this. And I don't necessarily, if you are able to distinguish and separate Hamas from Palestinians, then, and I know Palestinians don't like Israel, as well, but if you separate them from each other, I can have a conversation with you at least. If you're defending Hamas, there's nothing, what can we talk about? Because not only are you defending them, these are people, if you really care about Palestinians, then you would probably be against Hamas. Like you said, where are they putting their resources in when you've got them in that, one of the poorest areas out there? Nobody wants them. Egypt built a wall. Egypt built a wall that goes underground. It's like 20 feet up. And then it goes underground, I think like 10 feet to make sure. And all across there to make sure that they don't come through. There are some refugees over the years that have gone to, there's some in Israel, but they don't want to have them all flooding in and they have nowhere to go. Don't hurt your cause by doing that. But here's the news I wanted to ask you about as well. Just I heard just about 3 hours ago, Starbucks employees, Union Express support for Palestine. following the recent Hamas terrorist attacks. Starbucks Workers United, this is via Chuck Calesto. I have seen this separate. I like kind of bigging up the X people I follow more than like New York Times or something. Represents around 9,000 Starbucks baristas faced backlash after expressing solidarity with Palestine. And here's a picture of them. Carlos, can you support Palestinians and not support Hamas?
It's very, very difficult to distinguish the two, to be honest with you, because they are the ruling government. Again, I'm going to say that in quotation marks, of the land. So it's really hard. And then if you talk to the normal people, who knows what they believe in? And I'm not talking about people that are here in America that have been Americanized. I'm talking about over there. There's a lot of brainwashing propaganda that happens from very, very early on, where they teach kids to hate Jews. And they actually, I've seen videos, and I don't know if this is specifically in Palestine or in other areas, where they're actually playing out like knife attacks on Jews. It's so complicated. It's not an easy answer. You would have to get one-on-one with a person to see where their views are and then assess. You cannot, I don't think the complexities of this situation, you can't group anybody into any group at this point.
Wow. That's a very good statement, because that's why I wanted to have you on, to get that perspective, a lot to think about, to develop my thoughts on this. Metalopoly says they killed Americans at the festival. Last I heard, the count is 27, I believe. Or I don't know if that includes the missing, 14 missing. They killed Americans at the festival and have over a dozen American hostages. I'm afraid we're going to war. And if you look at New York, we've seen stuff in New York. We've seen stuff in Dearborn, which is not that surprising when Dearborn there's a very heavily, they're very heavily populated Muslim community there.
Oh, I saw that all their flags were showing up.
Yep, and they roll deep. What'd you think of that?
It's very disturbing. It's again, I don't understand this. These are children. These were civilians. Again, this isn't an attack on a military outpost. This isn't like war to war, right? This is civilians that were attacked. This is like, honestly, it is comparable to 9/11. This is Israel's 9/11, because these were all civilians that were killed. Just like in our 9/11, they were all civilians. These terrorists didn't hit a military outpost like in Pearl Harbor, let's say, right, where the Japanese bombed a military post over there in Pearl Harbor. No, this was on civilians. This is on people. That's why I call them cowards, right? They won't engage the IDF, right? They go after unarmed people who can't really defend themselves. That's why they're cowards. They're not warriors.
And we're seeing more footage in America. New York City this is where it's reported. And there is, it's hard to see here, but there is a man reportedly in the car doing donuts or whatever those are called. Yeah. And is a pro-Hamas and has a flag. This is alleged. We don't know, but that goes towards this day of jihad. What do you know about this? This is where a lot of people are talking about it, where it seems like is it the current leader of Hamas or ex-leader of Hamas is saying that, calling for kind of like literally bloodshed in a way. So indirectly, it sounds like a call to action, which sounds pretty wild. What do you think there's have you heard anything about that? Do you think there's anything to that?
I did, and I saw a post on it. And listen, I don't put anything past these people. And here's why it's very difficult to support the Palestinian side, even as a whole, because it's hard to know who is who. Listen, right now, who's kidnapping? Who's killing? Who's cheering for that? It's not the Jews that are cheering for that stuff. It's not the Christians that are cheering for that stuff. It's the supporters for the Palestinian people and for Hamas. So how do we separate this? It's very, very difficult. Now, like Monopoly said that we're going to war because of all the Americans. So my position on Ukraine, right, is different than my position on Israel. I don't have any ties to Ukraine, right? That's on them. I do support their ability to defend themselves from an invading country, just like I would be if China were to invade or some other country were to invade the United States. I would want the ability to defend myself, and I would, right? I would absolutely defend my country. I would pick up arms. So in this case, Israel's a little bit different due to, obviously I'm biased, I have my religious connection, but not only that, I can actually explain to you that we have Americans that were kidnapped, Americans that were killed, and Americans that are being held hostage. I was there just a couple of months ago. So Osiris, if I was there and this takes place there, I could have been kidnapped because we were in Palestinian areas, like in Jericho and Bethlehem. Those are not, Jewish controlled areas. So it could have been us. I would want my government to do all that it can to secure my return. As an American, I can't leave Americans behind. Isn't that our saying? No man left behind. So in this case, my position does change from the Ukrainian position from two different perspectives.
Yes. So we are hearing a lot of things going on in the country in regards to this. This is in America. These are what looks to be Jewish young ladies at University of Washington, and they break down after student organizations post pro-Hamas rally on campus.
Wow.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if Benny is or not, but to me, it's different to say pro-Hamas than pro-Palestinian, and a lot of people are not distinguishing that fairly to me.
Agreed.
So I don't know if that's really pro. There's very few people I've seen that are pro-Hamas. Like that one guy that I played where he talked about he tried to make light of the paratroopers, which is crazy. That's pro-Hamas. There's not a lot that I've heard, but there's these women here on the campus. It's only a few seconds here, and they're distraught. Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is a university, how do you take a side in any side? You more than likely have Palestinian students and you definitely have Jewish students. How do you take a side in this? At the very least, there should be something about peace. I could understand that, but it shouldn't be a pro anything on either side as like I said, as a university.
Yeah, I don't know how the university is handling this. It looks like they're struggling. They don't know what to do. They don't know which side to go to. Because it seems like the Black Lives Matter side, I don't know why, I don't know what it has to do with Black Lives, but the Black Lives Matter side is siding with Palestine. And it looks like some of the people that used to be, I wouldn't be surprised if these young ladies rolled with Black Lives Matter at one point. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just saying you've got people in that position who are with Black Lives Matter. Now Black Lives Matter is with Palestine. Just to make my position clear, I don't side with none of them. I'm American first. I kind of stay out, but bringing Carlos in to see like what's the bigger interest here. But some people are very pro one side, pro another side. And you're seeing this tension now with the Black Lives Matter movement, the young people. Seems like the young energy is with Palestine in the country.
Yeah, because remember, we're in this culture where it's cool to be oppressed. And obviously the Palestinians, they see the Palestinians as being an oppressed group, which is really interesting because the majority of Jews in this country are left-leaning. A good number of them, right, are left-leaning. And the left supported BLM. So if you're a left-leaning Jew, let's say in the New York area, right, where there's a lot of them, where's your stance now? It's like, wait a minute, I supported your movement and you're supporting my enemy's movement? So it really causes a conundrum. Not only that, but like that picture, that meme that I sent you earlier this morning where you've got, apparently the Skittles community is also standing and supporting the Palestinians, but based on their, religious beliefs, they don't like them.
Yeah, The Babylon Bee had a hilarious headline. We had that on the Discord. I saw it from the Discord. Someone posted it on our Discord. Babylon Bee said because Rashida Tlaib has both flags. That's a problem for me. If you're pro-Palestine and you're an American representative, and she has a Palestinian flag outside her office, you've probably seen that.
Yes.
That does need to be explained, right? I mean, that to me, even if you have an Israeli flag, to me that has to be explained right outside your office for the American people. But okay, that's different. If you've got that and the rainbow flag, now you've got a lot to unpack for me. Babylon B said the Palestinian flag from Rashida Tlaib's office threw the LGBTQ flag off the roof of the building. And they have a thumbnail of the Palestinian flag standing up and the LGBTQ flag falling off, which is, they are so good at their headlines, man.
Yeah, they are. And you know, there's a difference between, and you know what? It's, again, the propaganda machine. The propaganda machine from the left is going to tell you how hateful and bigoted us Christians are, especially towards that community. Well, I mean, we just don't agree with their choice in their lifestyle because the Bible calls that sin, and we just want them to repent, right? Just like we're sinners, I'm a sinner, and I have to repent, right? It's no different. But with that other side of the religious spectrum is very different. It's not just about repenting on their end. They will kill them, they'll hang them, they'll throw them off the rooftops, and you go, oh, Carlos, you're just being hyperbolic about everything. No. You go to these Muslim majority countries that are seriously dominated by Muslims, and are people able to express their religious views freely? No. Christians get persecuted, Jews get persecuted, and gays get persecuted. So you got to don't look at it here in this country because we have laws to protect it. Look at where they're in charge and look how society is for them over there and tell me if it's the same or not.
Yes, and in regards to this here, this is something that I've been talking about. You mentioned it as well. This is somebody on X posted, the children of Hamas leaders literally drive Lamborghinis and Rolls Royces and live in mansions in Qatar and Europe. Hamas leaders are worth billions of dollars. Maybe you should ask them to donate to the Palestinian people instead of asking Elon Musk. And that was a response to asking Elon Musk to do more because he made supercharging free in Israel. But here's my take. I'm not against you. I think Jeff is pro. Is that okay to label you pro-Palestinian, Jeff? He's more pro-Palestinian. I'm fine with that. Just please, you can't ignore that, especially when a lot of, not you, Jeff, but a lot of people are socialists who are pro-Palestinian, and you don't acknowledge Hamas flying rockets that they're spending. You know, some of them are just handmade, but I mean, these are expensive rockets that we're seeing flying over the ghetto to get over to Israel, millions of dollars flying over while they're being displaced from their homes. They got nowhere to go, no food, no water. How does that reconcile?
Yeah, and from what I understand, these rockets that are being launched are more sophisticated than the ones in prior years because they're reaching further and their precision on their target is more accurate. So again, it's an advancement of technology, which means even more money has been pumped into it. But here's something interesting. I want to give you something interesting to think about because we mentioned it before, the Rafah Gate and how the Rafah Gate leads into Egypt and how Egypt has that blocked off essentially, right? Did you notice when the Syrian civil war took place and during the Obama administration, you know, we went in, bombed everybody and so on and so forth and caused a huge amount of displacement for the people of Syria, and we brought a bunch of them over here. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Remember how a bunch of them even scattered into European countries? Okay.
Yep.
Isn't it interesting that they always seem to go to westernized and, if you will, liberal countries? How come they don't go to their fellow neighbors, Muslim neighbor country? How come none of those countries take these people in? So if Egypt, and Egypt has gone back and forth between being predominantly Christian and predominantly Muslim, they've gone back and forth. Why is Egypt not taking in these fellow brothers of theirs, right? Because they're Muslims. We're talking about religion, right? These are brothers. My brothers and sisters are also Christian. Doesn't matter what their nationality is, right? They're my brothers and sisters. So why aren't these folks taking them in? Isn't that interesting? Number one, they always go to Christian countries, Christian-dominated countries, and they don't go to Muslim-dominated countries where their cultures and their lifestyles are similar.
I think it says a lot where you're going to go. I mean, it speaks volumes. You're trying to.
If I'm displaced, I'm not going to go to some place that, number one, I'm not really in tune with culturally, right? It's a different culture because it's going to be harder for me to assimilate, right? And then in addition to that, right? I might, you know, because that's the rhetoric that they hate me. I'm not going to go to a country where I'm being hated, right? I'm going to go to a country where, you know, either the language is similar, the culture is similar, my faith is similar, so I can fit in, right?
Absolutely. It shows a lot. It tells you a lot. What do you think this factors in? We had great conversation. If you go to Carlos, we are featuring Carlos today of Patriots of the American Republic. Link pinned in the chat. Please support. All you got to do is hit the link and sub up. You don't want to miss this stuff. And we were talking about immigration. Does this tie in at all? Because I do have concerns of an open border. And we've seen people coming in from Syria. And we talked about Venezuela and other countries, but Africa and China and everywhere. And a lot of these people, you know, these are the people, when we're counting the I want to call them illegal immigrants because there's still a lot of them seeking asylum, but their court case is going to be 9 years out. So they're coming through the country. Those are the ones we know about. Then there's more that we don't know about. Is this a security issue? And, you know, especially coming up against this day of jihad, whatever it is.
Yes, absolutely. In every single fold, even if you exclude the terrorism aspect of things, it's still a security, right? Because we reported it on our channel last year how Maduro was emptying out his prisons since we've got an open border, and all those criminals have been let out and they're coming over our border willy-nilly. It's the same playbook that Castro did with the Cubans back in the early 80s. So it's a huge security risk. Now, here's the thing. These people these terrorists are sleepers, right? They might not attack today. Who knows? They may attack 2 years from now, 3 years from now, right? These attacks need to be planned. They're not done off of the spur of the moment. Hey, I'm just going to do whatever. No, they're meticulously planned, and they're done on specific areas, specific targets to cause maximum damage, and so on and so forth. So this is a huge security risk, not just today, not just next month, not just next year, but going forward.
Yeah, so we got to tighten that up, man. I'm worried more about that. What do you think about American intervention? You talked about it with the hostages. You know, it kind of amps things up. Do you think we are going to get to war?
Based on all the stuff that's going on with Ukraine, based on our military being, in my view, at a very, very weak point, with all the, identity politics that are going in, recruitment goals not being met, our economy the way it is, I'm very, very concerned. I think we should be hesitant. I think we should do everything that we can to get those Americans back. But also, if we do decide to go in, it does expose us a little bit more. And I'm actually surprised that China hasn't invaded Taiwan by this point. I thought they would as soon as Russia started going after Ukraine, because look at what Hamas was able to do against the Iron Dome. They overwhelmed the system. They sent so many rockets, it overwhelmed them. And if I were a strategic person, I would choose at a moment where the United States is overwhelmed to either, I'm not going to attack them, right, but to attack somebody that I do want to attack. So I would expect, and I could be very wrong because I don't know what Xi Jinping his ultimate goal is, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, so we have very serious times up ahead because what happens here could determine where we go from here. So we don't know if this is going to escalate into a bigger conflict. Let's talk about the region there. Do you think, because I heard rumors, I did not check this out, about Hezbollah getting involved. I assume that's from the north in Lebanon. And then do you think it could escalate from where it is now into bringing in other people? I think that's why we sent our carrier out there, or maybe two carriers. What do you think about that escalation within the region?
It's very, very probable. Remember that there are over 100 different Muslim terrorist groups. That's just the reality of it. Hezbollah is just another one. And so they are also looking for the destruction of Israel, no different than Hamas, no different than ISIS, no different than Al-Qaeda. They're all branches of the same tree, if you will, right? So I'm sure that we're sending personnel there as a show of strength, right? Because if you, like, for instance, let's take Floyd Mayweather, right? He's got a bunch of bodyguards, right? If it's just Floyd by himself, somebody might actually challenge him. But with all his bodyguards around, he rolls with like 5 or 8 of them, right? Now you're hesitant. It's like, whoa, yeah, I'm not going to try that. So I think our presence there might hold these other groups back from attempting anything.
Yep. And let me play this here, and then we'll get to some comments here about from Jeff, just to make sure Carlos has a chance to respond. But here's Nick Fuentes talking about on this exact topic.
If there's going to be fighting then in the West Bank, if Hezbollah will attack Israel, and then after that, we're waiting to see what happens with Hezbollah. If there is fighting between Hezbollah and Israel, this may drag Iran into the fighting. Because if Israel decides to launch an invasion, not just of the Gaza Strip, but if they also decide, for whatever reason, to invade southern Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah, then this may invite an Iranian response, or an Israeli attack against Hezbollah may also include attacks against Iran on Iranian soil. And it may involve attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities or Iranian satellites in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon. And if they attack Iran, then that could drag the United States into a war with Iran. So that's where we are. That's what we're waiting to see with bated breath. We're watching and waiting to see what this Israeli counter-response will be. And we're watching all these other variables, all these other dependent variables, how they will respond to Israel's response.
So that's him breaking it down. I think that pretty much aligns with what you were saying there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all very possible. Who knows what these people are planning, but they're certainly capable of it. It wouldn't be the first time that Israel goes into Lebanon to defeat a terrorist organization. They did it many, many years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, let me see here. Her name is Brigitte Gabriel. Are you familiar with her?
No.
She's a very, very smart woman. She's originally from Lebanon, and her life story is phenomenal. Her village was taken over by a group of Muslim terrorists, and she was like about 7 years old or something like that, and she had to hide in a cave, her mother and her father, because the Muslims were going around. This was when Lebanon was predominantly Christian. So they went around and they were killing the Christians and so on and so forth. And she thought that she was going to die. According to her testimony, her parents dressed her up on her Sunday best because they thought that particular Sunday was their final day. They thought they were going to die. And thankfully, the IDF went in and saved them. And they took them back to Israel and, got them medical help and so on and so forth. And she, eventually migrates over to the United States and becomes an American. And she is very, very pro-Israel, coming from a Lebanese background. But the point is that Israel had to go into Lebanon to save those innocent people, right, from those attacks. So it wouldn't be the first time. But based on where we're at today, where Iran is at, and Hezbollah and all that, it becomes a lot messier and a lot more complicated.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you a chance to, if you wanted to respond, Jeff is, and I've been very, I would say, pretty neutral on this. I hit Israel pretty hard from the standpoint of their what they lobby for in America. We'll get to that in a second. Jeff is calling you a Zionist. Is that a derogatory term? What do you think? Do you have a response to that just in general?
Well, it depends what he means by Zionist. I've never been called a Zionist before, so that's a first for me. So I don't really know how to explain that. All I can tell you is that I'm a Christian. And to me, that means that I want to see Israel as a state because Jesus is Jewish, right? And Jesus says that he will return. And whenever somebody threatens to wipe out somebody, that to me is an act of evil. Nobody should be wanting to wipe out anybody. So, I'm afraid Jeff is on the wrong side of humanity, if you will.
Yeah, I've heard that there are some people in the Israeli government that could believe that starting a war would actually fit in Revelations. Does that make sense, or is there any truth to that?
It depends, right? So the problem with the book of Revelation, it's not an easy read. You've got to keep in mind who wrote it, when it was written, and why it was written, right? So it's John, right, the disciple, right? And he's writing it on the island of Patmos. And he's writing it during Emperor Nero, who hates Christians and was actually using Christians as lampposts. He would douse them in oil and light them up on fire to light his streets at night. So there was a huge persecution against Christians at this point. And so he writes this, and he writes it in an illustrative format, a metaphoric format, so that it doesn't get caught, it doesn't get ripped apart, it doesn't get destroyed, right? So there's a lot left to interpretation. Now, there's one particular war that the Old Testament mentions that we don't have a historical record on. And it's essentially the union between modern-day Russia and modern-day Iran, which back then was called Persia, and then Russia was known as Magog, arguably speaking, right? We've never seen an alliance, a historical alliance of war between these two. We don't have a record of it. But it's interesting, in the most recent years, the two have come together to have an alliance, right? Iran is getting a lot of their nuclear material from Russia. So there is something that could potentially happen here. I can't say for sure if it is. If it isn't, who knows? And there's a lot more countries involved. It's not just those two. Lebanon is mentioned. Actually, Ethiopia is actually mentioned. And there's like 3 more countries that I just don't remember off the top of my head. But you can find it in Ezekiel 37 and 38, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, excellent, respectful reply from Carlos there. He's like, that's the first time I've actually had that label. I don't know what Zionist really means. I thought my thought was Zionist means that Israel, the land is entitled to Israel. Is that basically a Zionist? I don't know. In the chat, you could tell me.
I don't know either. I had one guy describe Zionists as there are like any. I've heard that Zionists are extremists for the Jewish people. That's how I've heard it.
That's how people use it. That's how people really use it.
Right. I don't know. I've never met a Zionist before. I don't know. I am only telling you what I believe based off of what I've read on the Bible. The Bible declares that this land belongs to the Jews, right? And people are going to bring in, and I'm sure your friend Jeff is going to come in and say, well, what about the Quran? Well, let's take a look. What came first, the Bible or the Quran? The Old Testament was written, between 3500 to 1500 BC, while the Quran was written 536 AD? I mean, we've got a chronological discrepancy there if we're going to go by order, right? They weren't written at the same time. No. So you have to understand the history behind the Quran. Now, from what I understand, Muhammad is the main author, the only author of the Quran. How do you corroborate what this guy's saying 500 years AD after the establishment of Israel already? How can you say, okay, it belongs to these group of people when these group of people have been established for 4,000 years in that section?
And then also, how much, I mean, if you're a Christian, you're going to go by the Bible, right? I mean, you're not going to go by the Quran. So, and I don't, Jeff, I don't have any problem with your take. You've been very respectful with it. It looks like there's a disagreement. I'm kind of stuck in the middle on this one. Here's a problem. I'm going to ask you this problem I have, then we'll be out. But I want to end out on a happy note, talking about get a Prime Animations update. You did a video about a week ago, but we will talk about that as the last second. But I was very heated with the Israeli government because of how they operate. This is the government now, we're not talking about the land and the historic part of it. But when they operate in America, they're lobbyists. And they're always lobbying for their self-interest. I'm a nationalist, populist, libertarian type, original constitutionalist. There's not one issue that I am passionate about that the Israeli government is also passionate about. In fact, it feels like, I don't have tangible proof, but it feels like the Israeli government is actually anti my beliefs. And so I have a problem there. How do you reconcile that? Am I off with that? What do you think?
Well, first, our own government is against our own belief. I mean, a report came out just a couple of weeks ago that the FBI is targeting Trump supporters, and last year a report came out and said we're targeting Catholics as extremists, right? So I think it all depends on who's in charge. We know at this juncture that, number one, let's start with the fact that the United States was the first country to support Israel as an independent state back in 1949. We were the first ones there to sign it. Why? Because of our Christian foundation. Right? We have a Christian Judeo foundation, and that's what it is. And so we supported that. Now, I always thought and I always understood that that was just the norm, right? Then comes Obama, and the Obama administration doesn't really like the Israeli government, and there's tension, and we can see the decline of the relationship between the two, right? And I understand where you're coming from in the sense of, well, they just seem like they're in their self-interest, and who isn't going to be? You've got to keep in mind again where they're at, surrounded by literally enemies who want to destroy them. So of course they want their self-preservation. You want to be friends with the big guy. We're the big guy, right? So you don't want to upset the big guy, right? So you got to play that political line with every single administration that comes in. Even when it wanes with the Obama. I remember BB coming in 2013 and speaking to Congress because Obama wanted to do the Iranian nuclear deal, right? And he came and he spoke to Congress like, look, don't sign this. This is very dangerous for us, et cetera, et cetera. When Trump comes in, we see that partnership solidify once again because Trump is pro-Israel. Obviously, he understands the religious connection between the two countries. And so bottom line is, my man, is we need to support Israel in the sense of they are number one. We are their strongest allies. It is biblically tied, whether we want to or not. But at the end of the day, if you actually do believe in the Bible, America is going to be gone. Meaning, America is either going to be destroyed, captured, or it actually ends up turning its back on Israel, which is not good because when all that stuff in Revelations comes to pass, the victor is going to be Israel, not anybody else, right? And America isn't even mentioned in the Bible. All I know is that the final battle that it talks about in the book of Revelation, the Battle of Armageddon, by the way, I was in that valley. It was really, really nice. It was amazing to be there.
Oh, wow.
That's where the final battle is supposed to take place. And it says, the Bible says that Israel will stand alone. It will have no allies. No one will come to its aid. So again, I can only take two things out of that. Either America turned its back on Israel or America was eventually defeated. And if history shows us anything, it's that every great empire that has its rise eventually has its fall. We're not going to be any different. We are eventually going to fall. It's just when is the question.
And this is Carlos, Patriots of the American Republic. This is one of the best breakdowns. This is one of the best, probably the best. Is it fair to say pro-Israel, Carlos?
I am pro-Israel because of my religious faith, right?
This is the best pro-Israel argument I have heard. Ben Shapiro has been completely unhinged. I'm not a fan of his response. Carlos has been really thought out, well thought out, not unhinged. Go sub. It's pinned in the chat right now. Patriots of American Republic, Carlos and Saul. Very, very good tag team there.
Osiris, thank you for having me on. There's so much more I can go into. I can go into the weeds of the Bible, right? I've been studying it for 14 years. I've been following geopolitics for the last 12 years. I'm very, very well informed. I will say this. Propaganda is going to be big, just like it was in 2011. They're going to show you. They're going to show you people who have been injured who weren't really injured. They're going to show you. Sometimes they can even kill their own, and they'll make it seem like it's the other side targeting. Right? For example, Bibi in 2011, he was being criticized for shooting back rockets, right, and hitting civilian buildings, and so the propaganda was like they're targeting the Palestinian civilians. They want to eradicate them. And Bibi's response was like, listen, I'm firing where the rockets are coming from. They're firing them next to civilian buildings. They're firing them next to the schools, hospitals, apartment complex. I can't help that, right? And so the Obama administration, as well as the UN, dismissed that. And I used to watch CNN at this time. I didn't know much about right and left. I didn't know how dishonest CNN was. So I watched them heavily. And then, and obviously CNN was on the side of the Obamas, of course. And then there was an independent Indian journalist from his hotel room, started recording live and recorded 2 Hamas terrorists literally building building 2 rocket launchers next to, I don't know if it was a school or a hospital, and they launched it. The guy caught it all live. And I'm like, wow, I have been so duped, because I thought that CNN was legitimate. And that was when I stopped watching CNN and I knew they were propaganda. So be very, very careful with the propaganda that goes on out there.
Yep. It's a part of the war. It's a bigger part of the war than ever with social media now. They're really putting it hard. Remember, Ukraine popped off. They were doing these fake, the Ghost of Kiev. It was a video game, man. This is crazy stuff.
Absolutely. But thanks again for having me on. It's always a pleasure, man. I truly appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. Appreciate it. And everybody, thanks for stopping by. We're out. Peace.